Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. For Thomas Chen, that surprise came on a rainy Tuesday morning in April, when he found himself pacing the hospital corridors, his heart racing with a mixture of joy and fear. At 45, he thought he had life figured out, a successful career as an architect, a loving wife, and a peaceful home in the suburbs. But fate had other plans. The day started like any other. His wife Mai was preparing breakfast, laughing about how their twins were especially active that morning. "They're probably dancing in there," she joked, rubbing her belly. Neither of them knew those would be among their last moments together. When Mai's water broke 3 weeks early, Thomas rushed her to the hospital, holding her hand and promising everything would be fine. The delivery room buzzed with activity. Nurses moved swiftly, doctors spoke in hushed tones, and medical machines beat steadily. The first baby arrived with a strong cry that echoed through the room. "It's a boy," the doctor announced. Before Thomas could fully process becoming a father, another cry joined the first, his second son, arriving just 2 minutes after his brother. But joy quickly turned to fear as Mai's condition suddenly deteriorated. The medical team worked desperately to save her, but complications arose that no one could have predicted. In the span of an hour, Thomas became both a father and a widower. The world seemed to spin around him as he tried to make sense of gaining 2 precious lives while losing his soulmate. The first few days passed in a blur of paperwork, funeral arrangements, and sleepless nights. Thomas found himself alone in the hospital nursery, staring at his newborn sons through tear-filled eyes. The nurses noticed something peculiar. Whenever they separated the twins, both babies would cry inconsolably. Yet the moment they were placed side by side, they would instantly calm down, their tiny hands often finding each other through the clear hospital bassinets. "I've never seen anything quite like it," whispered Nurse Chen, no relation, who had been working in the neonatal unit for over 20 years. "These boys have a special connection." She helped Thomas learn how to hold both babies at once, showing him tricks for feeding and soothing them simultaneously. Her kindness became a lifeline during those difficult early days. Thomas named them Ming and Wei, names that Mai had chosen months ago. Ming, older by 2 minutes, had a tiny birthmark behind his left ear, the only way to tell them apart. Even as newborns, their personalities started showing. Ming would always cry first, and Wei would follow seconds later, as if instinctively responding to his brother's distress. Back home, Thomas transformed their modest 3-bedroom house into a space for 3. The room that was supposed to be Mai's art studio became the nursery, painted in soft greens and yellows. He placed their cribs close together after noticing how the twins slept better that way. Late at night, he would often find them facing each other, tiny fingers reaching out through the crib slats, as if trying to maintain their connection even in sleep. The challenges of single parenthood hit hard. Thomas learned to function on minimal sleep, mastering the art of preparing bottles one-handed while soothing a crying baby with the other. His mother-in-law, Lena, moved in temporarily to help, bringing with her the wisdom of generations and the comfort of family. She taught Thomas traditional Chinese lullabies that Mai used to sing, and together they created new routines and rituals for their unconventional family. The twins' mysterious bond became more evident with each passing day. When Ming caught his first cold at 3 months old, Wei developed a fever just hours later, despite being perfectly healthy before. During checkups, if one baby got upset, the other would become distressed even if they were in different rooms. Their pediatrician, Dr. Patel, documented these occurrences with fascination, noting how unprecedented their level of connection seemed to be. As spring turned to summer, Thomas found strength in unexpected places. His neighbors organized a meal train, bringing home-cooked dinners and offering to watch the twins so he could shower or take short naps. His colleagues at the architecture firm adjusted his schedule to allow for more work-from-home days. The local twin parents support group welcomed him warmly, sharing advice and understanding that helped him feel less alone. Slowly, Thomas began to see the beauty in his new reality. Despite the profound loss of Mai, her love lived on in their sons' identical smiles and in the way they seemed to share a language all their own. During midnight feedings, he would tell them stories about their mother, how she loved painting landscapes, how her laugh could light up a room, and how she had dreamed of teaching them both to play the piano. The twins grew stronger each day, their bond deepening in ways that amazed everyone who met them. By 6 months, they had developed their own way of communicating, a series of coos and gurgles that seemed meaningful only to them. When one achieved a milestone, like rolling over for the first time, the other would master it within hours, as if they were encouraging each other's development. Thomas kept a journal documenting these moments, filling its pages with observations and memories he wished he could share with Mai. He noticed how Ming would always look for Wei first thing upon waking, and how Wei would become fussy if he couldn't see his brother during mealtimes. Their pediatrician suggested keeping them together as much as possible, recognizing that their connection was not just emotional, but seemed to influence their physical well-being too. As the first year approached, Thomas realized that what had seemed like an impossible challenge had transformed into an extraordinary blessing. The twins not only helped him survive his grief, but showed him a new kind of love, one that defied explanation and reminded him daily of life's most precious gifts. Their mysterious bond became a source of hope and wonder, proving that even in our darkest moments, life finds ways to illuminate the path forward. Time flies when you're raising children, and before Thomas knew it, Ming and Wei were ready for their first day of elementary school. The morning was chaos: 2 identical backpacks, 2 matching lunchboxes, and 2 very different reactions to this big milestone. Ming couldn't stop talking about making new friends, while Wei quietly held onto his brother's hand, his eyes full of uncertainty. As they walked through the colorful hallways of Pine Grove Elementary, other parents and children did double takes at the identical twins. Their matching black hair was neatly combed, their new shoes squeaked on the freshly waxed floors, and their oversized backpacks made them look even smaller than they were. Thomas felt a lump in his throat, wishing Mai could see how their little boys had grown. "Remember, you're in the same class," Thomas reassured them, kneeling to straighten Wei's collar. "And Mrs. Zhang is your father's friend's wife. She'll take good care of you both." The twins nodded in unison, a habit that still amazed everyone who saw it. As they settled into their classroom, Thomas lingered at the door, watching as Ming immediately struck up a conversation with the boy next to him, while Wei carefully arranged his pencils on his desk. That first year of school revealed how different the twins were, despite their identical appearance. During the autumn music festival, Ming stunned everyone by sitting at the old piano in the school hall and playing a perfect rendition of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," despite never having taken a lesson. When Thomas asked him how he learned it, Ming simply shrugged and said, "I heard it in my head, Baba." Meanwhile, Wei showed an extraordinary talent for numbers. His teacher called Thomas in for a meeting to share that Wei had solved complex math problems meant for 3rd graders. "It's like he sees patterns that others don't," Mrs. Zhang explained, showing Thomas a notebook filled with Wei's neat calculations. He helps other students too, explaining things in ways that make perfect sense to them. But their differences didn't affect their unique connection. One winter morning, Wei suddenly burst into tears during math class, insisting something was wrong with Ming. The school nurse found Ming in the music room, holding his stomach and running a high fever. By the time Thomas arrived at school, both boys had identical symptoms, even though Wei had been perfectly healthy an hour before. Their classmates found the twins fascinating. During recess, other children would gather around to watch what they called the twin magic. Ming and Wei could play mirror games where they moved in perfect synchronization without looking at each other. They could finish each other's sentences and often asked for the same lunch items on the same days, even when separated in different activities. The most remarkable incident happened during the school's spring concert. Ming was scheduled to perform a piano piece, but came down with a bad cold the morning of the show. Wei, who had never shown any interest in piano, insisted he could fill in. To everyone's amazement, he played the piece flawlessly, his fingers moving across the keys just as his brothers would have. When asked how he did it, Wei simply said, "I saw it in Ming's head." Thomas started keeping a detailed diary of these occurrences, filling notebook after notebook with observations. He noticed how the boys would often wake up at the exact same time, even when sleeping in different rooms. They would crave the same foods on the same days, get hungry at the same times, and even finish their homework at the same moment despite working independently. Their grandmother, Li Nai, wasn't surprised by any of this. In our village, she would say, wrapping dumplings in the kitchen while the boys did their homework, there were twins who could sense when the other was in trouble, even from miles away. It's a special gift, a blessing from heaven. She would tell them stories about twin heroes from Chinese folklore, encouraging them to see their connection as something magical rather than strange. As the twins grew more independent, they began developing their own friendships and interests. Ming joined the school choir and started taking proper piano lessons, his natural talent blooming under proper guidance. Wei joined the math club and spent hours solving puzzles and brain teasers. But no matter how different their activities were, they always seemed to know what the other was doing. Their friends learned to accept their peculiarities. When Ming scraped his knee on the playground, his best friend didn't question why Wei came running from the library before anyone had called him. When Wei aced a difficult math test, Ming celebrated as if he'd taken it himself, knowing exactly which problems had been the hardest for his brother. Thomas worked hard to nurture both their individual talents and their special bond. He converted their garage into a space where Ming could practice piano while Wei worked on his mathematics, the music and numbers somehow blending perfectly together. Their different interests never created rivalry. Instead, they seemed to complement each other like two parts of a whole. The twins' teachers began to notice something extraordinary. When Ming played music while Wei solved math problems, Wei's solutions became more creative, and Ming's music gained mathematical precision. It was as if they were unconsciously sharing their talents, each making the other stronger. Their primary school principal, Mr. Huang, called it a perfect harmony of art and science. By the end of elementary school, the twins had grown into confident individuals who didn't need to rely on their identical appearance to stand out. Ming became known as the music twin and Wei as the math twin, but they were proud of these distinctions. They had learned that being different didn't mean being distant. If anything, that individual strengths made their bond even more special. Thomas watched all this with a mixture of pride and amazement. On quiet evenings as he helped them with homework or listened to them practice piano, he would catch glimpses of May in their expressions, the way Ming's eyes crinkled when he laughed, just like hers, or how Wei would tilt his head when concentrating, exactly as she used to do. Their differences and their connection were both precious gifts, reminding him that love grows stronger when it makes space for each person to shine in their own way. The letter arrived on a sunny afternoon in spring. Ming rushed into the house, waving the envelope from the prestigious Beijing Central Music Academy. His hands trembled as he opened it, Wei standing close by, their breathing synchronized as always. Thomas watched from the kitchen doorway, his heart racing as fast as his son's. "I got in," Ming whispered, his voice barely audible. Then louder, with tears forming in his eyes, "I got in." The kitchen erupted in celebration. Their grandmother, Lena, immediately started making lucky dumplings, while Thomas hugged both his sons tightly. But in the midst of their joy, Wei stood quietly, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. That evening, after the excitement had settled, Thomas found the twins sitting on their backyard swing set. The same one they'd had since they were 5. They weren't talking, just sitting there, their shoulders touching, watching the sunset. It was Wei who spoke first. "Baba, Ming has to go. It's his dream." Ming reached for his brother's hand, and Thomas noticed how they both had tears streaming down their faces. The reality of separation hit hard during the weeks of preparation. The twins had never spent more than a day apart in their 16 years. Every time they packed something into Ming's suitcase, Wei would get unusually quiet. Their grandmother tried to help by teaching Ming how to cook his favorite dishes, but each cooking lesson turned into a memory-sharing session, with both boys recounting stories from their childhood. The changes started showing even before Ming left. Wei began having trouble sleeping, while Ming would get headaches more frequently. Their old pediatrician, Dr. Patel, who still kept in touch with the family, suggested they start practicing being apart for short periods. "It's like training a muscle," she explained gently. "You need to build up strength gradually." They tried spending time in different rooms, then different parts of the house, eventually working up to Ming spending a night at their cousin's house. Each separation was difficult, but they were determined to make it work. Wei threw himself into his advanced physics studies at their local high school, while Ming practiced piano for hours, preparing for his new life in Beijing. The night before Ming's departure was the hardest. Thomas found them in Ming's room at 3 a.m., both wide awake, sitting cross-legged on the bed. They weren't talking, just sitting there with their eyes closed, hands clasped together. When he asked them about it the next morning, Wei explained, "We were memorizing how it feels to be together." The airport was crowded that morning, but to the Chen family, it felt like they were in their own bubble of grief and hope. Lei Nei had packed enough dumplings to feed Ming for a week, though they all knew they wouldn't last that long. Thomas noticed how the twins kept finding excuses to touch, straightening each other's clothes, brushing lint off shoulders, small gestures that spoke volumes. Just before security, Ming turned to his brother. "We'll video call every day," he promised. Wei nodded, trying to smile. "And I'll practice the piano pieces in my head, so you can hear them too." They'd hugged for what seemed like hours, but was probably just minutes. Thomas had to gently remind them that Ming would miss his flight if they didn't let go. The first week was the hardest. Wei would wake up in the middle of the night, reaching for a brother who wasn't there. Ming called every day, his voice bright but his eyes tired, adjusting to the rigorous schedule at the academy. They tried to maintain their connection across the distance. Wei would solve math problems while Ming practiced piano, both believing they could still feel each other's presence. But life had its own plans. The time difference made regular calls difficult. Ming's intensive training meant he often had to practice during Wei's free time. Wei's advanced physics classes demanded more of his attention. They started missing calls, their daily conversations becoming every other day, then twice a week. The physical symptoms were unexpected. Wei developed insomnia, while Ming struggled with anxiety before performances, something that had never bothered him before. Their grandmother suggested traditional remedies, sending packages of herbs to Ming and making special teas for Wei. Thomas watched helplessly as his sons struggled to find their footing as individuals. Then came the night that changed everything. Wei woke up screaming, clutching his chest. "Something's wrong with Ming," he gasped. Thomas immediately called Ming's dormitory, his heart pounding. They found Ming in the practice room, having a severe panic attack. The school nurse later said it was probably due to exhaustion and stress, but Wei knew better. He had felt his brother's distress from thousands of miles away. That incident forced them all to acknowledge that the twins' connection wasn't just emotional, it was something deeper, something that couldn't be explained by ordinary science. Thomas arranged for Wei to visit Ming in Beijing during their next school break, but watching them say goodbye again was almost harder than the first time. Yet, slowly, something beautiful began to emerge from their separation. Ming's music took on a new depth, filled with emotions he'd never expressed before. Wei's understanding of quantum physics evolved in unusual ways as he began exploring theories about connection and entanglement that his teachers found fascinating. They learned to channel their connection differently. Instead of relying on constant contact, they developed a quiet confidence in their bond. Wei could sense when Ming had a successful performance, while Ming would send encouraging thoughts during Wei's difficult exams. Their grandmother nodded knowingly, telling them, "True connections don't weaken with distance, they just find new ways to grow." As the first semester drew to a close, Thomas realized that his sons were learning the hardest but most important lesson of their lives, that love doesn't require constant presence to remain strong. In their separation, they were discovering who they were as individuals while maintaining the precious bond that made them unique. Winter settled over both Beijing and Boston, bringing with it new challenges for the separated twins. In his tiny dorm room at the music academy, Ming found himself struggling with more than just homesickness. The pressure of performing at such a high level, combined with the constant ache of missing his brother, began to wear him down. His normally bright personality dimmed, like a light slowly losing power. Back in Boston, Wayne wasn't doing much better. Though he excelled in his physics classes, his teachers noticed how he would sometimes stop mid-sentence, as if listening to something only he could hear. During lunch breaks, he would sit alone, often touching the matching jade pendant he and Ming had received from their grandmother on their 16th birthday. Thomas noticed the changes in Wei first. His younger son, by 2 minutes, as Wei always reminded everyone, started having trouble sleeping. He would pace the house at night, especially during the times when Ming would usually be practicing piano in Beijing. The silence in their home seemed heavier now, with only one set of footsteps echoing through the halls. "I can feel an hurting, Baba," Wei confided one night, sitting in their kitchen with a cup of their grandmother's special tea. "It's like a shadow in my mind that isn't mine." Thomas listened, remembering all the times over the years when the twins had felt each other's pain. But this was different, deeper, more persistent. Meanwhile, in Beijing, Ming's music teacher noticed how his performances had become technically perfect, but somehow hollow. "Your playing lacks joy," she told him gently after one practice session. That night, Ming called home in tears. "I can't feel the music like I used to," he admitted to Wei. "It's like half of my heart is missing." The breaking point came during a major performance at the academy. Ming was scheduled to play in front of visiting musicians from around the world. That morning, Wei woke up in Boston with such severe anxiety that he could barely breathe. Thomas found him curled up in Ming's old bed, clutching his brother's childhood piano books. "Something's wrong with Ming," Wei gasped between breaths. "He needs me." Without hesitation, Thomas called Ming's dormitory. When they finally reached him, they found Ming in the practice room, having a severe panic attack. He had been there all night, trying to prepare for the performance, the pressure and loneliness finally becoming too much to bear. Their grandmother, who had been visiting cousins in Beijing, rushed to the academy. She found Ming pale and shaking, looking smaller than his 16 years. Through video call, Wei talked to his brother for hours, their words flowing together as if they were in the same room. "Remember when we were 10, Wei said softly, "and you played at the school concert? I felt your music then, and I feel it now. It's still there, Ming. We're still connected." The incident forced everyone to acknowledge that the twins' separation was taking a greater toll than anyone had anticipated. Thomas consulted with doctors, psychologists, and even traditional Chinese medicine practitioners, trying to understand how to help his sons maintain their individual dreams without losing their essential connection. Dr. Patel, their childhood doctor, suggested an unconventional approach. Instead of fighting their connection, she explained during a video consultation, why not work with it? She recommended setting up regular times when both boys could do their respective activities, Ming practicing piano while Wei worked on his physics, creating a routine that honored both their bond and their different paths. Their grandmother added her own wisdom to the solution. She sent them each a small meditation cushion embroidered with matching patterns. "Sit on these every morning," she instructed. 5 minutes of quiet together, even across the ocean. Let your hearts remember they are never truly apart. Slowly, they began to develop new ways of maintaining their connection. Wei would record himself talking about his physics discoveries, sending the voice messages to Ming, who would play them during his practice breaks. Ming would record his piano sessions, and Wei would solve physics problems while listening to his brother's music. They'd found that their best work still came when they were somehow sharing the experience, even from different continents. Thomas watched as his sons learned to navigate this new reality. There were still hard days. Wei would sometimes catch himself reaching for a brother who wasn't there, and Ming would call home just to hear the familiar sounds of their kitchen at breakfast time. But they were adapting, finding strength in their separation that they never knew they had. Their grandmother's words proved prophetic. "Sometimes we need to bend like bamboo in the wind. Too rigid and we break, flexible, we grow stronger." The twins were learning this lesson firsthand. Their connection remained unbreakable, but it was evolving into something new. A bridge across the distance rather than a chain holding them back. During a late-night video call, Ming shared something that gave them all hope. "When I play now," he said, his face tired but peaceful, "I imagine sending the music across the ocean to Wei. And somehow that makes it better." Wei nodded, understanding completely. "And when I look at the stars during my late-night physics studies," he replied, "I remember we're under the same sky." Thomas kept his own private journal during this time, documenting the twins' journey. Today, he wrote, one evening, Wei smiled during dinner. A real smile, not the brave face he's been wearing. And Ming's teacher called to say his music is finding its soul again. They're learning that love doesn't weaken with distance, it just finds new ways to express itself. The dark days weren't over, but they were changing. Like the seasons turning from winter to spring, Ming and Wei were discovering that their bond could weather any storm. Their individual paths might have led them apart physically, but their connection remained a constant star to navigate by, guiding them through the darkest nights toward brighter mornings. The call came unexpectedly on a quiet Sunday evening. Thomas was preparing dinner when his phone lit up with Ming's number. "Baba," Ming's voice trembled with emotion, "I'm coming home." Before Thomas could process the news, Wei burst into the kitchen, his eyes wide with excitement. He had felt it, known it, even before the call. Ming had completed his intensive music program in just 2 years instead of the usual 3, his talent and dedication pushing him to excel at an unprecedented pace. But those who knew him best understood that it wasn't just ambition driving him, it was the pull of home, the magnetic force of his twins' presence, drawing him back across the ocean. The weeks leading up to Ming's return transformed their home. Wei cleaned his brother's room obsessively, making sure everything was exactly as Ming had left it. Their grandmother arrived early, filling the house with the scents of all Ming's favorite dishes. Thomas found himself pausing in doorways, watching the empty spaces that would soon be filled again. On the morning of Ming's arrival, Wei couldn't sit still. He paced the airport terminal, checking the arrival board every few minutes. Thomas noticed how his younger son kept touching his jade pendant, a habit he'd developed during their separation. When the arrival board finally showed Ming's flight had landed, Wei suddenly grew very quiet, his eyes fixed on the gate. The moment Ming appeared, time seemed to stop. The twins stood frozen for a second, staring at each other across the crowded terminal. 2 years had changed them. Ming was taller, his shoulders broader, while Wei had grown leaner, his face more angular. But their eyes remained identical, mirrors of the same soul. When they finally embraced, many travelers stopped to watch, moved by the obvious emotion of their reunion. "You cut your hair," Ming whispered, touching Wei's shorter style. "I know," Wei laughed through tears. "I felt you disapprove when I did it." Their grandmother dabbed at her eyes with her sleeve, while Thomas tried to hold his phone steady to record the moment, his own vision blurry with tears. The drive home was filled with a mix of laughter and quiet moments. Ming couldn't stop looking at everything, the familiar streets, the changes in their neighborhood, the way the old oak tree in their front yard had grown. Wei kept one hand on his brother's arm, as if making sure he was really there. That evening, their house came alive in a way it hadn't been for 2 years. Friends and family gathered for a welcome home dinner, the table groaning under the weight of their grandmother's cooking. Ming played the piano for everyone, his music richer and more complex than before, filled with emotions that could only come from experience and growth. But the real magic happened later that night, after everyone had gone home. The twins sat at the piano together and without any discussion began to play. Wei, who had never taken a lesson in his life, matched his brother's melody perfectly, their fingers dancing across the keys in perfect synchronization. Thomas recorded it secretly on his phone, knowing he was witnessing something extraordinary. The following days revealed how their time apart had changed them both. Ming brought back not just advanced musical skills, but a new maturity, a deeper understanding of himself. Wei had grown too, his brilliant mind exploring physics theories that his teachers found revolutionary. Yet when they were together, they fell back into their old patterns, finishing each other's sentences, moving in unconscious harmony, sharing thoughts without words. Their grandmother watched them with knowing eyes. "See how the separation made their bond stronger," she told Thomas one morning as they watched the twins in the backyard. "Like tea leaves in hot water. The heat doesn't destroy them, it releases their true strength." Ming's return also brought unexpected gifts. His experiences in Beijing had given him new perspectives on music, while Wei's deep dive into physics had led him to theories about harmony and vibration that fascinated them both. They began collaborating on what they called their symphony of science. Wei's mathematical patterns translated into Ming's musical compositions. Their high school principal invited Ming to give a special performance, which turned into something unprecedented. As Ming played, Wei stood beside the piano, using a digital board to project the mathematical equations that matched his brother's music. The audience watched in amazement as sound and science merged, creating something entirely new. The local university's physics department heard about their unusual collaboration and invited them to participate in a special research project. Wei's theories about quantum entanglement found new expression through Ming's music, while Ming's understanding of harmony helped Wei explain complex physics concepts in new ways. At home, their relationship continued to evolve. They were no longer just twins who could sense each other's feelings. They had become partners in something larger than themselves. Their individual strengths, enhanced by their time apart, now worked together in perfect balance. Thomas noticed other changes too. The darkness that had haunted them during their separation had lifted, replaced by a new kind of light. Ming's music had gained depth and emotion that moved listeners to tears, while Wei's scientific insights seemed to touch on something profound about the nature of connection itself. Their grandmother summed it up best during one of their family dinners. "You see," she said, serving extra dumplings to both boys, "sometimes we need to walk separate paths to understand how connected we truly are." The twins looked at each other and smiled, understanding perfectly what she meant. As spring turned to summer, Ming and Wei spent countless hours in their converted garage, now a combination music studio and physics lab. The sound of piano music mingled with the scratch of chalk on blackboards, creating its own kind of harmony. Their different passions had become two parts of the same song, each making the other stronger. The idea came to Wei one morning while watching Ming practice piano. He noticed how his own fingers would twitch slightly, matching his brother's movements on the keys. It wasn't just sympathy or habit, there was something more, something that might explain their lifelong connection. That evening, he stayed up late, filling his notebook with calculations and theories. "Baba," Wei said at breakfast the next day, his eyes bright with excitement, "I think I know how to prove our connection scientifically." Thomas looked up from his coffee, intrigued. Ming stopped eating his congee mid-spoonful, already feeling his brother's enthusiasm bubbling through their bond. Wei's research proposal was simple but groundbreaking. He wanted to study the brain patterns of twins, starting with himself and Ming, to understand if there was a measurable connection between them. Their grandmother listened from her usual spot by the window, nodding slowly. "Ancient wisdom meeting modern science," she murmured, pleased. The local university's neuroscience department was immediately interested. Dr. Liu, a leading researcher in brain mapping, agreed to help them set up the study. "We've seen unusual patterns in twins before," she explained during their first meeting, "but nothing quite like what you're describing." The initial tests were simple. The twins sat in separate rooms, connected to machines that measured their brain activity. When Ming played piano in one room, Wei's brain showed activity in the same areas, despite not moving his fingers. When Wei solved complex math problems, Ming's brain lit up in matching patterns, even though he wasn't seeing the equations. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Liu said, reviewing the results. "Your brains are showing synchronized activity across distances without any direct communication." The twins exchanged knowing looks. They had felt this their whole lives, but now they had proof. The research expanded. Other twin pairs were invited to participate, though none showed the same level of synchronization as Ming and Wei. The twins spent hours in the lab, their grandmother bringing them home-cooked meals, refusing to let them eat STAD laboratory food. Thomas watched with pride as his sons worked together, combining their talents in ways he never imagined. Ming's musical training helped them design tests that used sound and rhythm to measure brain responses. Wei's physics background led to new theories about quantum entanglement in neural networks. One day, while testing their brain patterns during a joint music and math session, something extraordinary happened. The machines recorded perfect synchronization between their brainwaves, creating patterns that looked like musical notes when mapped out. Dr. Liu called in colleagues from other departments to witness it. "It's like their brains are performing a duet," one researcher commented, watching the patterns flow across the screen. Ming sat at a portable keyboard while Wei worked on quantum equations, their minds dancing together in a way that science couldn't fully explain. Their grandmother wasn't surprised by any of it. "In our village," she told the amazed researchers, "there were stories of twins who could feel each other's joy and pain across great distances. Modern science is just catching up to what we always knew." The researchers included her observations in their notes, recognizing the value of traditional wisdom. The media got wind of their research. Local news stations wanted interviews, science magazines requested articles, and universities from around the world sent inquiries. Thomas helped shield his sons from too much attention, wanting to protect their privacy and the purity of their research. Wei spent late nights writing up their findings, while Ming composed music that represented their brainwave patterns. They created a presentation that combined scientific data with musical interpretation, showing how the mathematics of their connection could be expressed through harmony. During one significant experiment, they invited their old pediatrician, Dr. Patel, to observe. She had documented their unusual connection since birth, and her early notes proved valuable to their research. "I always knew you two were special," she said, watching them work together. "But this goes beyond anything I imagined." The breakthrough came when Wei discovered a pattern in their synchronized brainwaves that matched certain quantum entanglement equations. "Look at this," he showed Ming, pointing to his calculations. "The way our brains connect, it follows the same patterns as quantum entangled particles." Ming understood instantly, his fingers moving to the piano keys. He played a sequence of notes that perfectly matched the mathematical pattern in Wei's equations. The researchers in the room fell silent, watching as science and music merged into something entirely new. Their research began attracting attention from major institutions. Universities offered research grants, and scientific journals requested papers. But the twins remained focused on their original goal: understanding the deeper nature of human connection. "It's not just about twins," Wei explained during a presentation at the university. "What we're discovering might help us understand how all human beings connect with each other." Ming added his own perspective. "Maybe music and mathematics are just different languages describing the same thing, the way hearts and minds reach out to each other." Thomas kept every news article, every research paper, every piece of evidence of his son's achievements. But his favorite moment was simpler: watching them work late one night in their home lab, Ming playing softly on the piano while Wei wrote equations on his whiteboard, their movements synchronized without either of them noticing. Their grandmother would often sit with them during their research sessions, telling stories about other twins from their family's history. These stories began to find their way into their research papers, bridging the gap between ancient wisdom and modern science. As their research gained recognition, the twins never lost sight of what mattered most: the simple joy of their connection, the way they could still make each other laugh without words, the comfort of having someone who understood you completely. Their scientific discovery wasn't just proving something to the world, it was helping them understand themselves better. 20 years had passed since that rainy night when Thomas lost his wife and gained two extraordinary sons. Now, standing in the auditorium of the newly opened Chen Twin Research Center, he could hardly believe how far they'd come. The center, a beautiful blend of modern architecture and traditional Chinese design, stood as a testament to Ming and Wei's remarkable journey. The grand opening ceremony was packed with people from all walks of life: scientists, musicians, families with twins, and curious members of the public. Their grandmother, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever, sat in the front row, beaming with pride as she watched her grandsons prepare to address the crowd. "When we were little," Ming began, his voice carrying across the hushed room, "our father used to worry about how different we were becoming. One drawn to music, the other to mathematics." He glanced at Wei, who continued seamlessly, "But what we discovered was that these differences weren't pulling us apart. They were showing us different sides of the same truth." The center was more than just a research facility. One wing housed a state-of-the-art music school, where Ming taught students how to use music to connect with others. The other wing contained advanced physics and neuroscience laboratories, where Wei conducted research on brain patterns and human connection. In the center, where the two wings met, was a space they called the Bridge, a place where science and art came together. Their grandmother's influence was everywhere. The garden surrounding the building featured plants used in traditional Chinese medicine, each carefully labeled with both scientific names and traditional uses. The cafeteria served her recipes alongside modern health food, and her wisdom was quoted on plaques throughout the building. Remember, one plaque read in both Chinese and English, "Connection is like brewing tea. It takes time, patience, and the right environment to bring out its full strength." Thomas smiled every time he passed this quote, remembering how she had guided them through their darkest days. The Chen Twin Research Foundation, which they established in their mother's memory, had already helped hundreds of families. They provided support for twins who needed to live apart, developed programs to nurture individual talents while maintaining twin bonds, and conducted groundbreaking research into the nature of human connection. During the opening ceremony, Ming and Wei demonstrated their famous Symphony of Science, now refined and expanded over the years. As Ming played an original composition on the grand piano, Wei's equations appeared on large screens, showing in real time how the mathematics of their brain patterns matched the music's harmony. We've learned something important, Wyatt told the audience, his voice full of emotion. The connection between twins isn't something to fear or fight against. It's a gift that can help us understand how all human beings are connected. Ming nodded, adding, through music, through science, through love, we're all part of the same beautiful pattern. Their research had expanded far beyond twin studies. They discovered that similar patterns of connection existed between close friends, longtime couples, and parent-child pairs. Their work was helping people understand and strengthen their bonds with loved ones, even across great distances. Thomas watched from the side of the stage as his son shared their story. He remembered the tiny babies who couldn't sleep unless they were touching, the young boys who could feel each other's pain, the teenagers who struggled with separation, and now the men who had turned their unique connection into a gift for the world. The foundation had a special program for parents of twins inspired by Thomas's own journey. Sometimes the hardest part is knowing when to hold on and when to let go, he often told worried parents. But trust that their connection will guide them, even when they take different paths. Their grandmother's role in the foundation was special. Though she no longer cooked huge meals for everyone, she still shared her wisdom with visiting families. In our culture, she would say, sitting in her favorite spot in the garden, we believe that twins are a blessing from heaven. Modern science is helping us understand why our ancestors knew this to be true. The research center became known for its unique approach to studying human connection. Traditional wisdom worked alongside cutting-edge technology. Scientists and artists collaborated on projects. Families found support and understanding. It was everything Ming and Wei had dreamed of creating and more. During quiet moments, the twins would sometimes sit in the bridge, Ming at his piano and Wei at his whiteboard, working in the seamless harmony they'd maintained since childhood. Visitors would stop to watch, amazed by how two people could be so different yet so perfectly in sync. 20 years after losing their mother, they had created something that would have made her proud. The Chen twins had shown the world that connection, whether between twins, family members, or friends, was something to be celebrated and studied, not feared or dismissed. Thomas's journal, which he kept since the boys were born, now sat in a special display case in the center's library. Its pages told the story of two brothers who turned their unique bond into a force for good, helping others understand the beautiful complexity of human connection. As the opening ceremony concluded, Ming and Wei stood together at the podium, their father and grandmother beside them. This center, they said together, their voices harmonizing naturally, is for everyone who has ever felt a connection they couldn't explain. It's for everyone who believes that love and understanding can bridge any distance. Looking out at the crowd, Thomas saw not just his son's success, but a legacy of love that would continue touching lives for generations to come. Their story had begun in loss, but it had blossomed into something beautiful, a testament to the power of connection, understanding, and the unbreakable bonds of family.